61. I apologize for my past. Severus Snape. Minister Bagnold's voice rang through the Wizengamot. According to Patty Somerset's testimony, the charges against you under the Prohibition of Wizards Harming Muggles Act have been dropped. However, regardless of the victim's wishes, you must answer for your breach of the Prohibition of Obstructing Auror Enforcement Act. On the day Kingsley Shacklebolt found you, why didn't you tell him the truth about the missing potion? She asked. Severus looked up at the minister, her bearing and features oddly reminiscent of Professor McGonagall, and replied, "Because I wanted to catch the culprit myself. Once I realized a potion of mine was missing and a terrible incident had occurred because of it, my first thought was to solve the matter personally." "And what did you do then?" Bagnold pressed. "On the night you arrived at Badminton Manor, you used the Confundus charm on a Muggle police chief at the local station, and through him you obtained a key lead about the person you suspected, correct?" "Yes." "The next morning, you went to Horace Slughorn's house. According to his testimony, you believed you could no longer conceal the source of the potion, so you told him that if Aurors came asking, he should not help cover it up and should tell the truth, correct?" "Yes. At the time, I thought I would catch the guilty party." "Shortly after you left Slughorn's, you received a blackmail letter from Sanguini Bruh and Eldred Volpe. They had abducted Dudley Dursley, the Muggle boy who had been with you, and forced you to help concoct an antidote to awaken Patty Somerset, correct?" "Yes." "You subdued them and learned the truth, yet you did not turn them over to the Aurors. Instead, you conspired with them to steal Patty Somerset from Auror custody. Is that correct?" Severus answered steadily. "Yes." "And after the abduction, you told Bro and Volpe to go into hiding, which led the Ministry to misjudge your actions and issue a maximum warrant arrest. In the ensuing events, you repeatedly resisted Auror attempts to apprehend you, correct?" "That is the case." Severus admitted every charge Bagnold read out. The contrast between his candor and the panic on Bro's and Volpe's faces could not have been clearer. The jurors murmured. Bagnold's gaze sharpened. She met Severus's eyes and asked sternly, "Do you wish to address the court about the things you have confessed?" Severus sat very still. Calmly, almost quietly, he asked, "Minister, if I had handed Sanguini and Eldred over to the Aurors at that time, would they have been brought here to stand trial?" Bagnold's expression did not change. "Whether the Wizengamot convenes depends on the charges and the attitude of the jurors," she said ambiguously. He shook his head slightly, as if he did not expect a different answer. "An unknown wizard, a discriminated vampire, and the victim is a Muggle," he said. "The Ministry would scarcely bother. Once it was confirmed that they had administered the potion, they would have been sent straight to Azkaban. They would die there," he continued, "and Patty Somerset would likely have ended her own life at home. If I had handed them over to the Ministry, 3 lives would have been lost because of my choice." A hush fell over the courtroom. All eyes were on Severus, who sat at the center bench. At that moment, a shaft of light from an exhaust vent near the ceiling struck him, bathing him in a pale glow. Bagnold's gaze flicked away. Severus raised his head and looked instead to the highest row of the chamber, where the white-bearded old man sat. He met Albus Dumbledore's pale blue eyes, and his voice carried through the silence. "Some might say, how can someone with such a disgraceful past speak in this way?" Severus went on. "They are not wrong. What a person says means little. What a person does is what matters. In the years after Hogwarts, I drifted and went astray. I made many mistakes. I was spared punishment under Albus Dumbledore's protection. When I returned to Hogwarts, I held the titles of professor and head of house, but in truth my bitter nature prevented me from caring for or guiding my students as I should have. Students resisted me, hated me. Those criticisms are justified. A man who is wrong should be judged by his faults. But after term began this semester, one rare night, I reflected on the ignoble first half of my life and realized I could not go on like that. I repent sincerely for the wrongs I have done, and I apologize to those I hurt. I intend to change, truly change." His words silenced even the radio announcer broadcasting the proceedings. The voice over the airwaves fell still. Wizards across Britain, listening at home, stared at their radios. Severus continued, voice steady. So when I learned what had happened with Sanguini and Eldred, I made a choice. They had acted only for their loved ones. I was willing to help them, even if I had to bear the consequences and the guilt. I accept all charges against me for violating the prohibition of obstructing Auror Enforcement Act. The admission struck the chamber like a thunderclap. As murmurs swelled into uproar, he went on. Whatever judgment the Wizengamot renders, I will accept it. I will temporarily resign from my positions as potions professor and head of Slytherin. I will ask Professor Horace Slughorn, who has already done so much for me, to return to Hogwarts and cover my positions until further notice. The clamor on the high platform intensified. Many members stood, stunned. Across the wizarding world, people listened in disbelief. Only Dumbledore remained composed. He met Severus's gaze. His deep, clear blue eyes, inscrutable as ever, reflected something unrateable. You slick-haired, powder-faced git. Of all the sensational scandals roiling the magical world lately, Lucius Malfoy, current head of the Malfoy family, a governor of Hogwarts, a staunch pureblood supremacist, and Severus Snape's oldest comrade, was naturally among the best informed. Ever since the fall of the man they had served, most of their former comrades had been flung into Azkaban, and Lucius and Severus had pared back even public appearances, confining their conversations to private. The instant he heard that Severus had fled with a muggle in tow after openly defying the Aurors, Lucius's first thought was, that old greasepot's finally lost it. They had all once shared the same foxhole. None of them could deny how bad it stank. In those days, they had rallied behind a single absolute leader who promised a glorious pureblood reign. Then, overnight, that leader was gone. When disaster came, some Death Eaters clung to loyalty like the Lestranges. Family after family dragged to Azkaban, while others bent the knee, as Lucius and Karkaroff had done, waiting for the tide to turn. Severus, by Lucius's reckoning, had been spared only by Albus Dumbledore's protection. Lucius lumped him in with the rest of those who were merely biding their time. So why, Lucius wondered, if Severus had swallowed his pride, would he now lash out at a muggle? If the aim was to prove his pureblood zeal, why hadn't he done it earlier? When the news first broke, Lucius, who believed he knew Severus inside and out, saw no other explanation. His immediate conclusion: Dumbledore had finally driven Severus mad. Since taking the post of professor and head of house at Hogwarts, Severus had grown darker, more taciturn, carrying some hidden load. Lucius had always thought Dumbledore half mad. Working under him had turned a cunning, ruthless Death Eater into the man before him now. And apparently, after 8 years, Severus was throwing his life away, torturing muggles to relive the past. Reading the Ministry's top priority wanted notice in the paper, Lucius felt the sour sympathy of one fox watching another trapped. He followed every press update. When the Quibbler sensationalized the story, he bought a second-hand copy, snorted his way through it, then ordered the issue with the ending. Vulpe's portrait of Severus struck him as the work of someone terrified by the very dark arts their old master had once praised. Witty, gentlemanly, gentle, patient, kind. What rot. Obsequious drivel and outright lies, he thought. How could any of those adjectives apply to the black-robed, stone-faced man who never cracked a smile? On the basis of that single passage, Lucius dismissed the whole book as fabrication. Clearly, he decided, once Severus came to his senses, he had cooked up an act to exonerate himself. So when the day of the Wizengamot trial arrived, Lucius had a wireless set tuned early, and with his wife and their idle son, he settled into the drawing room to hear every word. When Severus's apology for the past echoed from the speaker, Narcissa froze. "Snape, he's serious?" she whispered. Young Draco, beside her, looked bewildered. He had met Snape and remembered him vividly, yet the voice on the wireless bore no resemblance to the black-robed, barbed-tongued man whose words were always a sting. "Father," Draco said, "Snape, he's being forced to say this, isn't he?" Lucius stared blankly for a moment, then muttered, "Never imagined. Never imagined you slick-faced pretty boy, would actually." Narcissa watched him, worry creasing her brow. She knew that though her husband spent his days muttering things like, "Severus is nothing but a half-blood upstart. Without the Dark Lord, he'd be nothing," he felt a certain affection for his old comrade. If Severus really had mended his ways, if he was turning his coat, the family would have to distance itself. Before Narcissa could comfort him, Lucius burst into sarcastic applause. "You grease-slicked, powder-faced wretch. You can really act," he barked. Narcissa stood frozen. Draco only looked more puzzled. "Surely you don't think that was real?" Lucius scoffed. "No doubt it's all an act to escape conviction." "Since when does the Wizengamot convict based on whether a wizard confesses?" Narcissa asked. "The jury votes. Guilty if they say guilty, innocent if they say innocent. The accused can't decide for them." Lucius clicked his tongue in admiration. This retreat in order to advance, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Meanwhile, in Surrey at the Borough, everyone, except Arthur, who was at work, and Bill, who had gone to Egypt, crowded around an ancient wireless thing. Arthur had modified so many times it barely held together. They heard Severus's statement and were stunned. Only George and Fred shouted and whooped. "See, we told you Professor Snape isn't like you all said. He's fun and has style," Fred declared. "And you still wouldn't believe it. Now he's said it to the judges and the live wireless. How could it be fake?" George added. Ron and Ginny, too young for Hogwarts, gaped. Percy, half prepared, looked only mildly surprised. Charlie, who'd already spent years at Hogwarts and been on the receiving end of Severus's scorn in Gryffindor, was in disbelief. Their mother Molly was the same. Mother and son locked eyes. Charlie exploded. "He called me a slug brain, said I insulted the art of potions just by lifting a cauldron, and now he claims he's repented and wants to turn over a new leaf?" "That didn't sound like Snape," Molly murmured then, considering. "But people change. After so many years at Hogwarts, he's bound to reflect on who he used to be." Charlie couldn't accept it. He clutched his head and howled. "Then let him wait till George and Fred have had 2 years of it before he repents. Why did Bill and I have to suffer through every minute? It's not fair." The twins' triumph didn't last. The wireless next reported that Severus intended to resign from Hogwarts, and for them losing such an entertaining professor was a real pity. All over Britain's magical world, everyone who knew Severus or had left Hogwarts in the last 6 or 7 years leapt from their chairs. Like Charlie, they couldn't believe this was the same Professor Snape they remembered. But with Sanguini and Patty's testimony already on record, and lacking Lucius's years of reading between Severus's lines, even some of the Wizengamot jurors began to think the words they'd heard might be genuine. Inside the courtroom, Minister Millicent Bagnold regarded Severus with a complicated expression. Sanguini and Volpe stared, stunned, at the Mr. Snape who had won their trust during the long flight. Only Albus Dumbledore, sitting high on the dais, broke the silence and took over the proceedings from Bagnold. "As for your resignation from Hogwarts," he said quietly, "perhaps we can discuss that privately after the hearing." "If no one else wishes to speak, let us proceed to the vote," Bagnold announced. "Those in favor of finding the charges not guilty, raise your hands." 63. Minister's Office. The moment Dumbledore finished speaking, the members on the dais began the final vote. The jurors in purple robes did not look at anyone's face. They simply raised an arm or kept it down. Severus remained impassive. Sanguini and Volpe craned their necks, trying to count the upraised hands with mounting suspense. So many arms went up at first that before they could finish tallying, Dumbledore's voice rang out again. "Those in favor of the charge being upheld, raise your hands." This time, every hand that had been up went down. Only 3 or 4 lonely limbs stayed raised. Among them, unmistakable, was the expressionless Barty Crouch. Delight and astonishment lit Sanguini's and Volpe's faces. On the far side, the wireless reporter, breathless and spluttering into his microphone, announced the tally to his listeners. The majority find the charge not proven. Severus Snape, Sanguini Brooke, and Eldred Volpe are cleared. Dumbledore's verdict rolled through the chamber. One juror stood and began to clap. Then more rose, and a hearty round of applause swept the room. Severus's gaze, however, stayed fixed on Minister Bagnold. The woman who had never crossed his path before had been among those who voted the other way, and he could see clearly that she was the first to stand and that she had led the applause. He was not surprised by the outcome. He had known Dumbledore would never allow him to go to Azkaban. If the vote had gone the other way, the headmaster would have found some other route to acquittal. What puzzled him was Bagnold's display. Dumbledore's public vindication had, by its force, slapped the ministry in the face. particularly Scrimgeour, Crouch, and Minister Bagnold herself, who had signed the most wanted warrant. That left Bagnold, who could have slid quietly into retirement, with an ugly blot on her record. Anyone recalling her tenure might mention the gaffe of issuing a reckless warrant without proper investigation. By all accounts, she should resent Dumbledore, or at least treat him coldly. So what did her warmth mean? Bagnold answered the question herself. Stepping forward, she spoke in tones of open admiration. We have just heard heartfelt words. Severus Snape has shown, by deed and speech, a genuine resolve to change. She went on. 8 years ago, Albus Dumbledore vouched for him. Today, he has vouched for himself. This shows that since the end of those dark years, the Ministry has cleansed itself of the last taint left by you-know-who, and it vindicates the decisions we took in the great trials that followed. Irredeemable villains were sent to Azkaban. Repentant offenders were given a fresh start. We may therefore believe that Britain's magical world will be brighter, and every witch and wizard's future more hopeful. Her words swelled into thunderous applause and were carried by wireless into every wizarding household. Even Severus was for a moment nonplussed. Nearly a decade in office had not been wasted on her. She had taken a shattered ministry at the worst of Voldemort's power. In a few sentences after the verdict, she had all but erased the stigma of signing that warrant. With a little shifting of blame, claiming the request had come from Scrimgeour and Crouch, and she had merely countersigned, she could reduce the episode to a footnote. One might accuse Britain's civil servants of idleness, but never of lacking guile. Severus gave the minister a long look, then patted the still elated, distracted Sanguini and Vulpa, and with them bowed to the bench in gratitude and respect. The hearing ended on that fitting note. Outside the chamber, Lucius Malfoy was already heaping every synonym for cunning and treacherous he could think of upon Severus. The Weasleys cheered. Stunned by Severus's transformation, they nonetheless rejoiced at the outcome. Most British wizards who had followed the case approved the verdict. Only a handful, nursing fixed prejudice, refused to believe Severus Snape could ever truly change whatever he said or did. But whatever the public thought, the judgment was final. When the Wizengamot dispersed, Severus exchanged a few quiet words with the thoroughly relieved Sanguini and Vulpe, sent them off with Patty, and turned toward a side corridor. Dumbledore was waiting there. Face to face, the headmaster smiled. A brilliant speech and a remarkable change, Severus. Many will remember today's words for the rest of their lives. So every move I make will be watched, to see whether I meant them or spun a grand lie? Severus asked with a shrug. Dumbledore regarded him calmly. People must answer for their words. Some think a casual lie harmless, others weigh every syllable. Severus smiled. I am clearly the latter, and you believe that, don't you? Dumbledore did not answer directly. Instead, he said, Harry Potter, at least, believes it. I gave the boy the choice to return to his aunt's house, yet he chose to stay with you. He says you have taught him a great deal. They fell into step together. Dumbledore had more to say. Horace sent me a letter before the hearing. He has agreed to take your post at Hogwarts, but your closing words gave him precisely what he prized most. Face, of course. Professor Slughorn cherishes that. The Dursleys trust you, your post is filled, and Mr. Potter has no objection, Dumbledore continued. So your original request to me presents no difficulty. However, someone else wishes to speak with you privately. He led Severus into a ministry lift and rode up to the topmost floor. Stepping out, Severus felt a stir of recognition. He knew perfectly well whose office occupied this level. It belonged to no department, only to one person, and every wizard on the floor served that individual alone. This was the minister's office. 64. What can the Ministry of Magic offer me? As Severus had expected, the person Dumbledore led him to was the Minister for Magic, who had just taken part in the trial, Millicent Bagnold. Severus did not bear her any particular malice. She had political skill, but she seemed to have lost the will to grapple with the ministry's deep, systemic problems. The precarious position Sanguini and Vulpe would have been in without his intervention was not simply the result of one minister's choices, but of the state of the entire magical community. The ministry was only a small government. Its failings were the failings of wizarding society. Even if Sanguini and Patty's romance had never become a public spectacle, their identities alone would have exposed them to discrimination and injustice among wizards. Vampires were treated as lesser beings. A disabled muggle was even more vulnerable. It was because such social prejudices existed that the ministry so often turned a blind eye to the vulnerable. That public opinion could now be bent to change Sanguini and Patty's fate was only because people loved a tragic love story. The core problems of discrimination remained unchanged, and they were hardly within the reach of a minister nearing retirement. Relatively speaking, during the trial, Bagnold hadn't pressed too hard, hadn't asked the sharpest questions, about kidnapping a minor, for example. And, in the final vote, she had been one of the first to raise her hand. Those were all indirect ways of helping Severus, Sanguini, and the others. So when Dumbledore ushered him into a private meeting with the minister, Severus kept the courtesy expected of him. "Thank you for your vote today, Minister Bagnold," he said, taking a seat on the sofa in her office. The minister's manner away from the public eye was gentler than it had been in the courtroom. "No need to thank me, Professor Snape. As I said at the trial, you proved yourself. I simply made the right decision." A few pleasantries were exchanged before Bagnold stopped beating around the bush. "I asked Headmaster Dumbledore to arrange this private meeting because there is something I would like your help with." Severus glanced at Dumbledore, who had already begun sampling the small pastries set out in the office. He had expected the headmaster would not leave things at Sanguini's case. Dumbledore always took precautions for himself. "May I hear it, then?" Severus asked. "Have you been following the reports coming out of Wales recently?" Wales? Severus fished vaguely for the news he'd noticed while on the run with Sanguini and Vulp, papers full of their story, but he did remember seeing something else. "The werewolf pack near Denbighshire?" Bagnold relaxed slightly at his familiarity. "Exactly. At the beginning of the month, a wizard reported a gathering of werewolves near Denbighshire. Aurors were sent to investigate and identified more than 10 werewolves. They appeared to be organized, part of a pack, possibly under a leader, and engaged in secret activities. But before the Aurors could carry out a thorough investigation, the pack somehow got wind of them and disappeared." Her expression hardened. More than 10 werewolves gathering in an organized group was a far more serious concern than the case of Sanguini and Patty. If the situation was allowed to worsen, it could lead to violent attacks, or worse. For a minister approaching retirement, that would be ruinous. Aurors poured more manpower into the hunt and found clues in North Yorkshire. 3 children from wizarding families went missing there, all under 8, the youngest only 5. Aurors found traces of werewolves, then lost the trail again. The next lead turned up a week ago in Nottinghamshire. Severus had been listening impassively, but he interrupted now. This time, the Aurors didn't go in on their own, did they? Bagnold shook her head. "Scrimgeour suspects there's a problem inside the Auror office. He reported it to Crouch. Crouch then came to me, asking for a unit outside the Aurors to make contact with that pack. I asked Headmaster Dumbledore for assistance." Dumbledore, who had been silent until then, spoke in his quiet, deliberate way. "I recommended Remus." The name hit both living and spectral Snape. Severus's face tightened. The ghost's expression grew severe. "Lupin," Severus said. "He is the obvious choice." "Remus Lupin took the assignment," Bagnold confirmed. "At first, it went well. He embedded himself with the Nottinghamshire pack and learned they were responsible for the 3 missing children. But 3 days ago, we lost all contact with him. We don't know if he's safe. I cannot trust the Aurors to investigate this. If the wrong word leaks, we'll lose all hope of finding clues, and we might put Lupin in even greater danger." She looked directly at Severus, earnest. "Yesterday, Dumbledore suggested I ask you for help. I hesitated at first, but after hearing your speech at the trial today, I know you are someone to be trusted, Professor Snape." Silence followed her plea. Severus did not accept so readily. He felt no particular warmth for the minister, and a botched investigation could have catastrophic consequences for her career. She had no better options. If he refused, she would be left flat. Under the steady gaze of the headmaster of Hogwarts and the Minister for Magic, 2 of the most powerful wizards in Britain, Severus picked up the black tea beside him and sipped deliberately. To a request of this political nature, an answer should be given in kind. He set the cup back on its saucer and said calmly, "If the aurors cannot be involved and I am to investigate alone, what can the Ministry of Magic offer me?" Chapter 65. Lupin was there. Severus's question had been calculated. On the surface, it could be read two ways. If the aurors don't take part and he puts himself at risk, what support can the Ministry offer while he's out there? Or, if he succeeds, what reward might the Ministry or Minister Bagnold be willing to offer? When he asked, he had not ignored Dumbledore's presence. Rather, he had deliberately made his stance plain to the headmaster. Dumbledore could be sympathetic and magnanimous when he chose to be. The relationship between Lupin and Severus, now a ghost, was complicated and best left unsaid. Severus cared about the three missing children, and if the werewolves harmed innocents further, he would feel responsible. That didn't mean Bagnold could expect him to investigate for nothing. Both Dumbledore and Bagnold were shrewd. They read the meaning behind his question. Dumbledore's expression stayed the same, silent and unreadable. Bagnold met Severus's eyes, drew a deep breath, and answered, "The Ministry will cover all expenses for this mission. Anything within my authority that you need, I will provide." "And then," Severus asked lightly, "if the situation is resolved peacefully, the Ministry can pay you a bounty of 3,000 galleons. You should know my profession, Minister. I'm not interested in money. I can arrange an honorary seat for you in the Wizengamot before I retire. If I wanted power, I wouldn't have resigned as Slytherin Dean. Order of Merlin, 2nd class." Severus let out a short, humorless chuckle. "More than 10 werewolves organized and kidnapped 3 children. If I solve this, a 2nd-class Order of Merlin is something I've earned. That's not a favor you're doing me." Bagnold studied him. "Money, power, fame, you don't care for any of those. What do you want?" Severus felt Dumbledore's gaze shift toward him as well. He relaxed back into the soft sofa and answered casually, "The Order of Merlin 2nd class should certainly be awarded if the matter is resolved. I have already promised in front of Britain's wizards that I will change. I must prove those words with action. In addition, grant me and my students the status of Ministry Special Envoys. We'll be traveling beyond Britain, and official papers will make things far easier. And officially publish Eldred's book in the Quibbler. You have the best channels for that. Sanguini and Eldred are counting on it, and Xenophilius will gain many subscribers from the attention this brings. That's all. If you agree, I will cooperate with Lupin on the investigation." Bagnold frowned, not because the requests were difficult. Compared to an honorary Wizengamot seat or 3,000 galleons, a special envoy credential and help publishing a book were trivial, but because Severus's demands were startlingly simple. "I can absolutely agree to your requests," she said. "When do you need me to depart?" Severus asked, decisive. "The sooner the better. The 3 abducted children are not safe, and Lupin has lost contact. Those werewolves could cause serious trouble at any moment. Depart as soon as possible. Let Dudley and me say our goodbyes to Sanguini and Volpe. I'll have you leave by this afternoon at the latest." Severus did not linger after accepting the mission. Once he left the minister's office, with only Dumbledore remaining, Bagnold's puzzlement broke through. "What was that about?" she asked. "He clearly doesn't care about money, power, or fame, yet he only asked me for travel papers and to publish that vampires and Volpe's works?" Dumbledore rose quietly and, without looking at her, said softly as he left, "You probably won't be able to tell the International Confederation of Wizards that I firmly uphold everyone's right to revel, like you did 8 years ago, Millicent." As they walked out of the office, Ghost Snape couldn't hold back. "Aren't you afraid that answer will make Dumbledore wary? Someone with deeper ambitions wouldn't be content with immediate rewards." Severus, moving toward the elevator, replied inside his head, "I can assure you Dumbledore understood exactly what I meant." Ghost Snape's face darkened. "Don't be cryptic. I don't like riddles." Severus let the elevator lights play across his face and said plainly, "The more people fixate on profit, the more they miss one thing. The most fundamental joys aren't money, power, or fame. They only obscure the true sources of happiness. Because of how society is arranged, most people need those things to access a comfortable life. but that's not the same as what gives life meaning. I was telling Dumbledore that I can see the essence of things, as he can. For wizards who have reached a certain level, the more they cling to those trappings, the deeper they fall and the more exhausted they become. I took Harry away so we could live better, so that I could spend each day as well as possible. Do you understand? Ghost Snape's expression didn't reveal whether he did. His face had remained hard ever since he heard Lupin's name. You know what that damned werewolf did to me? Severus was quiet for 2 seconds, then sighed. I know, I said we are one, didn't I? I know what you hate him for. But one thing I can tell you, I can confirm Lupin was not aware of the incident that almost killed you. They were in it together. Ghost Snape hissed through clenched teeth. How could he not have known? The elevator descended, and the light from its grates swept across Severus's calm face. It's hard for you to believe under the circumstances, he admitted. But I will find Lupin, and I will make him prove it to you. Harry never doubted his choice. Back in the Ministry atrium, Severus spotted Harry at once, sitting on the stone bench beside the famous fountain. The atrium bustled as usual, with witches and wizards coming and going, and Severus drew more than his share of attention. Nearly every passerby smiled or nodded in greeting. Excellent speech, Professor Snape. Even though you scolded me mercilessly in Ravenclaw, I still support your changes. Congratulations, Professor Snape. Slytherin students will always support you, Professor. Good morning, Professor. At the next Hufflepuff alumni gathering, I'll definitely speak up for you, Professor Snape. He returned their smiles and polite nods. The few 100-meter walk to Harry took him nearly 5 minutes. Looks like you've had a decent few days at Hogwarts, Harry. The familiar voice made Harry jerk his head up. Meeting Severus's calm, slightly amused eyes, he sprang to his feet. Professor, here by yourself? Dumbledore can't be that careless. Harry had imagined some speech when he saw his professor again, congratulations, or that he hadn't returned to the Dursleys. But Severus continued as if they were simply resuming an ordinary conversation. All the words Harry had prepared dried up. He fell back into their old cadence, answering as if those 4 days and the choices he'd made meant nothing at all. He asked a Mr. Weasley to stay with me. George's dad, I think. He ran into a ministry colleague and is over there talking. He pointed. Severus turned and saw a thinning, red-haired, bespectacled, lanky, middle-aged wizard glance their way. Arthur Weasley excused himself from his conversation and hurried over. Dumbledore said you might be a while, Arthur remarked, studying Severus with curious goodwill. William and Charlie told Molly and me that their potions professor would happily boil them alive, but after Fred and George came back from Diagon Alley, they insisted we were biased. Today, I finally understand why my sons view you so differently, Professor Snape. Arthur offered his hand. Severus took it, brief and formal. Your children are outstanding, each with distinct character and opinions, Mr. Weasley. They had hardly spoken before. When Severus had entered Hogwarts, Arthur was only a couple of years from graduation. The houses were more hostile then. That they'd meet now, without hatred, was saying something. The moment felt like their first proper introduction. Dumbledore mentioned you may head to Nottinghamshire later. When do you plan to leave? The Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office has business there. We could travel together. 3 o'clock this afternoon at the Leaky Cauldron. We can use its fireplace, Severus answered. No problem. As he parted, Arthur clapped his forehead, as if remembering something, and handed Severus an envelope. Dumbledore asked me to give you this, said it might offer some insight. After Arthur hurried off toward other ministry duties, Harry asked, Where are Sanguini and Eldred, and Miss Patty? Severus tilted the envelope in his hand and, puzzled, opened it. He drew out 6 sheets of yellowed parchment, dense with cramped handwriting. Across the top of the first page ran the title, On the Similarities and Differences Between Dragon Blood and Wolfsbane Aconite. Severus's expression tightened. The implication was immediate. Wolfsbane Aconite, one of the core reagents for the Wolfsbane potion, one of the great potions of the 20th century. The part of him that felt dead and sharp as glass, the ghost Snape, stiffened and fumed, everything about the note an accusation and a plan. This task is yours, Severus said without hesitation, handing the parchment to Harry. When you have ideas, we'll run potion trials. Ghost Snape glared, furious. I want him dead, the thought hissed. And you want me to improve his potion? No need to hide it. You'll help, Severus continued aloud, leading Harry toward the public flue. He sounded privately certain, and the certainty pushed like a physical thing. Ghost Snape sneered. Your confidence is bloated. You know it's Dumbledore's will. Since that night, you've cared nothing for your own life. Would you sabotage his plan over schoolboy hatred? Severus's voice cut through. The spiteful internal retort went quiet. They took the flue to a quiet backstreet German restaurant, some small place Volpe had apparently favored before. Pushing open the door, Severus and Harry found Volpe, Sanguini, and Miss Patty waiting at a corner table. Over here, Dudley. Mr. Snape. Sanguini waved them over. Patty, meeting Harry for the first time since she'd awakened, sat in a wheelchair and inclined her head solemnly in thanks. I've learned everything from Sanguini, she said. Thank you, Mr. Snape, and Mr. Dursley. You gave me new life and protected Sanguini and Eldred. Young Harry, unused to such direct gratitude, flushed scarlet and fumbled for words. Severus raised a foaming beer stein. Among friends, words are needless. Let's drink first. Glasses clinked. Harry lifted his orange juice. Sunlight spilling through the window pane warmed his face. Droplets on the glass sparkled. The sound of the clink, the sight of real smiles around the table, made something loosen inside him. He laughed with them, full and unhindered. He had never doubted the choice he'd made. 67. Spiderweb and fire. In a gloomy, cramped corner of the ceiling, a spider spun its web. A hapless gnat blundered into the snare and became hopelessly entangled. The spider scuttled across the strands, spitting silk, deftly subduing the struggling insect. Am I going to be bitten to death, Remus? The small voice whispered. No, you won't, the man answered. Don't hide it from me. I understand. I don't blame you, Remus. I know you're not like them. Stop talking, he snapped. When I'm gone, will you take Maggie home? Mum and Dad will remember me when they see her. I don't want them to forget. Please, Jimmy, shut up. Save your strength. The medicine's almost here. Don't cry, Remus. If they see you grieving for me, they'll beat you again. I've got my back to you. I'm not crying. Don't lie. You've cried for us plenty of times, haven't you? You're nothing like them. Pale and haggard, his clothes in tatters, his hair prematurely white, the man dabbed at tears he hadn't realized he'd shed. He kept scraping marks into the warped floorboards with a sharpened stick, never pausing. His back was soaked with sweat, his hands streaked with blood. Behind him, the boy whispered, They're back, Remus. I hear footsteps. He flung the stick aside and dragged a scrap of tattered felt over the hole. The shack's door burst open. Two bearded men stepped in, eyeing the disheveled man and the motionless boy. The brat's still alive? You've taken good care of him, one of them sneered. The man stared back, expressionless. Where's the medicine? He asked. They ignored him. Greyback says we're done here. He's finished on his end. Without the potion, he can't apparate again, the man said, voice shaking despite his attempt at calm. Greyback doesn't want him dead, right? He needs the next full moon. Don't throw Greyback in our faces. One of the thugs punched him, sending him sprawling. Don't hit him. Don't hit Remus, the boy sobbed. The other man tossed a vial to the floor. If it weren't for you, we'd be finished tonight. Do you know what this dose cost us? Ignoring the swelling in his cheek, the man snatched up the vial, a general cure from St. Mungo's, and clutched it tight. He struggled upright, scooped the boy into his arms, and uncorked the bottle. Drink up, Jimmy. It'll be all right. Don't be scared, he murmured, soothing the child who hugged a Niffler plush. Get him out, you sniveling waste. If not for you, we'd be finished already, one thug barked. He kicked the man and drew his wand. Burn it all. Greyback's orders. Leave nothing. Move the boy or fry with the shack. He hauled Jimmy up and stepped outside. At the threshold, he glanced back at the felt-covered floorboard. Flames roared, swallowing the shack, and with it, the last shred of his hope. Patty and I have decided, Sanguini said, fingers laced with hers. Once Eldred's book is out and we get the royalties, we'll buy back the farm in the Cotswolds. I never liked the magical world anyway. I'll live as a muggle, Patty replied. Eldred raised an eyebrow. You sure you can farm? I'll learn, and a discreet charm on the crops won't break any laws, right? Sanguini grinned as if the plan were already in motion. Patty only squeezed his hand, smiling through their banter. I've some regreening drought you can have, Severus offered, mentally counting his stock, but not for free. Every year you treat Dudley and me to a feast from your own produce. Can you raise chickens? I fancy roast, Harry pre-ordered. You're welcome anytime, Mr. Snape, Sanguini said solemnly. If ever you need anything, tell us. Count on it. Volpe and Sanguini both felt that this meal marked the end of their journey together. They talked of past and future until Volpe was half drunk. Then Severus checked the time and took his leave with Harry. Outside, Harry remarked, It's only been days, yet Sanguini looks completely different. That's love, Severus said, hailing a cab. It steals the timid and burdens the carefree with responsibility. When we visit their farm, we'll hardly recognize him, Harry predicted. The taxi soon deposited them in the street outside the leaky cauldron. Severus Snape, our prodigal returned. Cheers greeted him the moment he stepped inside. The morning's trial still echoed through the rooms. While acknowledging well-wishers, Severus muttered to Harry, I'd better invent an alias. How about Sherlock Holmes? Harry shook his head vigorously. I refuse to be Watson. Then you can be Conan. Even Dudley sounds better, Harry grumbled. Arthur was already waiting, brisk as ever. Let's go. Nottinghamshire now. In an old house on the outskirts of Nottingham, the county town of Nottinghamshire, England, the long-neglected fireplace burst into a sudden green flame. One by one, Arthur, Harry, and Severus stepped out of the fire. The choking dust blown up by the flue left all three of them coughing uncontrollably. Why doesn't the ministry send someone to clean flue network nodes like this more often? Arthur grumbled, patting dust from his robes and looking distinctly put out about his clothes. It can't be helped. Nottingham isn't a major wizarding hub, and the ministry always tries to save money in places like this, Severus said dryly. Severus had already led Harry to the house's front door, a place that looked as if it hadn't seen a visitor in years. He tapped his wand once, and the dilapidated door creaked open, letting in a breath of fresh air. Where are you heading next? He asked Arthur. 26 Sherwood Road, Arthur replied. Someone reported an elderly wizard there, not quite right in the head apparently, who's modified the street lamp outside his house. He somehow made it act like a person, running around at night and frightening quite a few muggles. I'm going to deal with the lamp and issue a fine. He glanced at Severus. Will you be continuing with us? Arthur knew the ministry's rules well enough not to pry. Severus, while naturally guarded, wore no particular animosity toward Arthur, and Dumbledore had arranged for them to travel together, so it made sense to stay close. We don't have much of a lead yet, and Nottingham's a big place. Searching on our own would be like looking for a needle in a haystack, Severus said. There aren't many wizards living here. Why don't we come with you and check out that street lamp first? Arthur brightened at the idea. Splendid. We could use Muggle public transport. What do they call it? The Underground. He became visibly excited at the thought and began rummaging through his suitcase for Muggle clothes. Severus and Harry exchanged a look that spoke volumes about the reliability of letting Arthur loose in Muggle society. Let's just take a taxi. It'll be more convenient, Severus suggested. Oh, well, that's fine too, Arthur said, closing his suitcase with a hint of regret. They waited in the suburban street until a taxi finally arrived, and the three of them rode out to 26 Sherwood Road. The area was a little way from downtown Nottingham, with Sherwood Forest nearby, and rows of pretty red-roofed houses that looked almost like holiday cottages. When they reached number 26, the strange street lamp stood where Arthur had said, dirty and bedraggled, as if someone had dragged it out of the woods. Mud and leaves clung to it. There was even a bird's nest perched at its top. In the daylight, it sat quietly, giving no sign of the nocturnal wandering Arthur described. How do you plan to deal with it? Harry asked. Arthur, with the enthusiasm of a man who'd pictured himself indispensable, produced a wrench from his multi-purpose suitcase, a tool no proper wizard would normally be seen using. It's obvious. Someone modified its wiring and slipped an animation charm on it, like an over-enthusiastic house elf rigging a teapot. We cut the power first, then try to lift the animation charm. Severus gave him a sardonic thumbs up. Truly professional. You must bring Dudley to the burrow sometime, Arthur said conspiratorially, glancing around as if to make sure no one else could hear. He'd love all my muggle gadgets. I have quite a few. Who sent you? A gruff shout cut through the conversation. A thinning-haired, fierce-looking old man in pajamas stormed out of the house. Who told you to touch it? Get away from my property. Go on, away. Arthur's face hardened. He drew his ministry badge from his robes. Mr. Foster, my name is Arthur Weasley. I'm head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The man's angry expression softened into an obsequious smirk. Sorry. Good afternoon, Mr. Weasley. If you'd not come, I was just about to deal with the lamp. It's not my fault. If you have objections to the penalty, take them up with the ministry, Arthur said, and slipped a fine into Foster's hand. Clutching the ticket, Foster's false politeness fell away, and he began to curse the ministry, retreating into his house, but leaning out of the window to hurl more insults as Arthur worked. Arthur, however, didn't seem put out. If he dealt with the lamp sooner or stopped ignoring 3 warnings, he wouldn't be getting a fine, he told Severus and Harry as he prepared his tools. Severus raised an eyebrow. Arthur had a wand in one hand and, with the other, a wrench he was suspiciously keen to use. As Arthur reached for a spell, a crisp, somewhat haughty voice sounded from nearby. "Are you here to fix that strange street lamp?" Arthur's hand jerked at the interruption, and a shower of sparks flashed from the tip of his wand before he hastily tucked it under his robes. Harry and Severus turned toward the voice. Standing there was a girl about Harry's age, with thick, bushy brown hair and an air of unabashed confidence. She held her chin high and smiled, revealing prominent front teeth. "Good afternoon," she said. "My name is Hermione Granger. My parents and I are staying next door. We're on holiday. Shouldn't you have cast a muggle-repelling charm around here before you started work?" Arthur murmured. "That old man Foster rushed out and gave me a fright. It's easy to overlook a thing or two. She didn't see anything just now, did she?" Severus asked. "She probably didn't, but even if she did, it wouldn't be a problem." While the two of them whispered, Hermione kept her eyes fixed on the street lamp whose service panel Arthur had just opened. "You're government officials, right? Last night I saw this lamp get up and run into the forest. I went to fetch my mum and dad, but by the time I came back, it had already run back. Dad insisted I was imagining things, but I swear I wasn't." The little girl talked non-stop, loud and animated, as if she already knew them. That made Arthur uncomfortable. He lowered his voice. "Children like this are the worst. The Obliviation Squad won't even touch them. It's down to us to make them think it was a hallucination or a dream." Severus looked at Hermione and shook his head. "If you try to convince her it was fake, you'll get into real trouble. She's the sort who never doubts herself." "Do you know this child?" Arthur asked, surprised. "No," Severus said, "but I know the type from listening." "What's that supposed to mean?" Hermione snapped when she noticed the adults whispering and ignoring her. "This street lamp is broken, isn't it? I don't know why it ran away. Maybe you're using it for some sort of robot experiment. If I'm right, you should help me prove it to my mum and dad. I wasn't lying. It's too late now to set up a muggle-repelling charm properly. We have to get her away from here," Arthur said. He was about to pull his wand from under his robes when Severus stopped him. "Don't worry. Some things don't need spells to be solved." He called out, "Dudley!" Harry, who had been hiding nearby and would never answer to Conan, slouched out with a long face. "I'm here, sir." "Go with Miss Granger and see her parents. Help her explain that the lamp really is broken and that we're fixing it now." Hermione studied Harry from head to toe. "Will he be convincing?" Severus patted Harry on the shoulder, as if vouching for him. "Don't worry, little one. Dudley is a professional." Harry forced himself to stand a little straighter and managed a stiff nod. "All right, then. Thank you, sir." Hermione accepted the reassurance with a polite thank you and stepped forward to lead the way. Severus gave Harry a prompting wink. "Go play outside with her for a bit, then come back." And Harry, looking troubled, followed. Once the two children were out of earshot, Severus helped Arthur set the muggle-repelling charm. He didn't stay long. "I'm going to ask Mr. Gray Foster a few questions," he told Arthur. "Be careful. That old man has a bad temper," Arthur warned. Severus merely waved and walked over to the crooked apartment door of the eccentric wizard Foster. He knocked. The door was pushed open a crack, and Foster poked his head out. On seeing Severus, he erupted. "What more do you want? The ticket's already been issued to me. My poor little Simmy is getting taken apart by you lot. Try anything more, and don't blame me for being rude." Severus met his glare calmly. He did not move his wand or speak an incantation aloud, but an intrusion of mind, legilimency, slipped into Foster's thoughts. "Relax, sir. I'm not here to cause trouble. You don't want a bigger fine, do you? We can talk about that ticket." Severus approached with the air of someone casually negotiating, but his mind was working hard. The matter of Lupin and the werewolves could not be left. Children had been taken, and Lupin himself was in danger. The ministry had no information to offer. Everything had to be dug up from scratch. Severus knew there weren't many wizards in Nottingham. If the werewolves had come here for a reason, tracing the locals one by one would yield a clue. As for using legilimency, technically illegal, Severus figured that if no one found out, it might as well have been lawful. Foster was a talented alchemist, but spells were not his strength. Under Severus's subtle probing, the recent month of his memories unreeled. 2 days ago, because of the incident with the lamp, Foster's wizarding identity had been exposed. A bearded wizard had come to Foster's door, asking if there were any St. Mungo's healers nearby. He'd been kicked out in a bad mood. Foster then saw that wizard go to his neighbors, the Grangers, the dentist family staying here for the summer with their child. Mr. Granger had stepped out with that bearded man and didn't return until the afternoon. And about a week ago, during the full moon in July, there had been a night of wolf howls from Sherwood Forest. The Muggle authorities had sent a fire crew in the following day to deal with a supposed wolf problem, but they found nothing. The matter was quietly dropped. Foster blinked back to attention and scowled at Severus. "What do you want?" Severus softened his tone. "I'm sorry, sir. My colleague wants to learn how you made the street lamp like that. He can't fix it back, can he?" Foster sneered. "Humph, don't think I'll help you." With a slam, the door shut. Severus shrugged and returned to Arthur. "Got the cold shoulder," he reported. Arthur snorted. "Who does he think he is? He miscalculated." Severus glanced up at the Granger's apartment next door and said quietly, "I wonder how Dudley's getting along with his new friend." "My family lives in the suburbs of London. We're here on holiday, but I'm not really interested in the forest or Shakespeare's birthplace," Hermione said as they walked back to the flat. On a whim, she turned and looked straight at Harry. He was thrown by the sudden motion and answered awkwardly, "Yeah, it does sound a bit dull." "You already told me about yourself. Out of politeness, you should introduce yourself too," Hermione said bluntly when he hesitated. Harry panicked for a second and blurted out a name to hide his embarrassment. "My name is Dudley Dursley. You can just call me Dudley. I live in Little Whinging in Surrey." Hermione nodded approvingly. "Very well, Dudley. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too, Hermione. I can call you that, right?" "Of course." Hermione's voice suddenly dropped. "I heard you calling that gentleman teacher. Are you two at some kind of school summer camp?" Harry waved his hands. No. It's just that teacher is looking after me at the moment." "Is it some special government department?" "I saw things. I'm not stupid. That lamppost was very odd. Are you here because of it?" Harry fumbled, trying to keep the explanation simple. He had no intention of talking about the deeper, stranger things. "Is it possible you misread it?" he asked, buying time. Hermione crossed her arms and fixed him with a look that made him squirm. The only other peer he'd met recently was Luna, who was entirely different from this quick, sure girl. Harry gave in. "Fine, you didn't imagine it. There really is something wrong with that lamppost. My teacher and another Mr. Weasley came specifically to deal with it, but it's classified. Yes, exactly like you think. It's a secret only a few people can know. I can explain it to your parents, but you can't tell anyone else." That seemed to satisfy her. "I knew it. Telling me the truth proves we can be friends. Besides, I don't have to tell Mum and Dad everything." She grinned mischievously. "I only said that to see what you'd do." Harry stared. He'd only just met her, and she already made an impression. He was about to say more when Hermione grabbed his arm and steered him toward their flat. "Come on, Dudley. This place is boring. Maybe we can play Chinese checkers, and you can tell me more about your teacher's work." Harry remembered the wink Severus Snape had given him before they set out. He didn't resist. His task was simple: keep Hermione occupied so she wouldn't interfere with Mr. Weasley's work. Mr. and Mrs. Granger were very kind. When Hermione arrived with a boy in tow, they were warm and offered afternoon tea. Hermione led him to her room. It was a plainly furnished holiday flat, but every shelf was full of books Hermione had brought, and a telescope stood by the window. Harry peered through it and followed the line toward the lamppost. That was clearly where Hermione had seen the strange thing. "I guess the odd gentleman next door, old Foster, is like you," Hermione said as she pulled a box of Chinese checkers from a cabinet. Harry had already been impressed by how quick she was. Now he had become almost numb to it. He swept the telescope over the direction of Arthur Weasley, and to his relief, could see no one crouched by the lamppost in broad daylight. He relaxed a little. "Maybe," he said casually. "I've only been with Teacher a few days, so I don't know much." They sat on the carpet opposite each other and set up the board. Hermione asked again, pushing gently. Harry decided to steer the conversation elsewhere. "Why do you seem to know everything?" he asked instead. Hermione sat up straighter, proud. "Read more books. My dad says the only reason you have problems is because you haven't read enough." "That sounds familiar," Harry said. "Teacher says things like that too." "You keep saying teacher. What about your parents?" she persisted. A shadow crossed Harry's face. "They died when I was very young," he said quietly. "I lived with my aunt and uncle until Teacher took me away." "Oh," Hermione looked genuinely sorry. "I'm so sorry." "It's all right. Nothing to feel sorry for." They were children, and soon the conversation lightened. Hermione introduced him to some of the books she loved. Harry nodded along the best he could. His attention drifted to a stuffed toy sitting on Hermione's bedside table. "What's that?" he asked. Hermione picked it up. "No idea. Maybe a platypus? Someone my dad went to help brought it to give to me, Thinio. They asked Dad to see a very sick child a couple of days ago and gave him this to pass on." "Isn't your father a dentist?" Harry remembered learning that detail earlier. "Yes," she said, squeezing the toy. They were desperate for any kind of doctor. Dad went with them, but when he came back, he was vague about it and just gave me this, saying the person had insisted. She paused when her finger brushed something hard inside the toy's mouth. "There's something in it." Harry felt an odd jolt of recognition. The toy didn't look like an ordinary plush. He had seen the creature before, in a picture book Volpe had carried when they were on the run with Sanguini and Volpe. It was a magical creature, called a niffler. Hermione zipped open the toy's back and revealed a hard, round object, a clear glass orb. "Why would someone hide this in a toy?" Hermione murmured, reaching toward the orb. An instinctive dread rose in Harry. "Don't," he blurted, and lunged to stop her. Their hands collided, both touching the cold glass at the same moment. Before either of them could react, the world went sharp, and then nothing. The next instant, the room was empty of them. Only the niffler plush, its back unzipped, and the empty shell of a toy tumbled onto the carpet. 71. Lost children. "I thought I should come to you, Dumbledore." As dusk fell, an unwelcome but determined visitor arrived at Hogwarts. Filch shepherded the elderly wizard in the dark green cloak and gold-rimmed spectacles up to the headmaster's office. Dumbledore set down his quill and rubbed his temples. "Ah, it has been far too long, Lyle." The man opposite him was composed but quick in movement. He sat upright and in a low voice said, "You know why I'm here." "Since his mother died, he hasn't come back," Lyle said. "He doesn't want to trouble me, I understand that, but we agreed he would write every week. In all these years, he has never missed that tradition." Dumbledore was calm. He was working for the ministry and ran into trouble. Lyle stared at him. In his last letter, he said there were a great many people like him around him. "Yes," Dumbledore neither denied nor looked away. "A pack of werewolves." "The ministry sent him to infiltrate them?" "Precisely. And now he's gone missing?" "So it seems." Silence settled over the headmaster's office. The portraits fell quiet, as if holding their breath. "Are you doing anything?" Lyle asked after a long pause. Dumbledore inclined his head. "Severus Snape. The ministry has arranged for him to go." "The reformed Death Eater?" Lyle's voice carried the knowledge of recent reports, and then he frowned. "Isn't that man his enemy?" "Times have changed." Dumbledore folded his hands. He will handle it. Where is he now? Lyle pressed. Dumbledore considered him for a moment, then wrote a few lines on parchment, folded it, and slid it across the desk. I understand how you feel, Lyle. If you insist on going, take this letter and find him. Lyle drew a deep breath, took the parchment, and paused on the threshold. Whatever happens, I thank you, Dumbledore. You were the only one willing to accept him in those days. He left without looking back. After he'd gone, the last rays of sunset moved across the office and slowly shifted onto the old man's white beard. Dumbledore folded his hands and sank into thought. As Arthur liked to boast, his knowledge of Muggle technology outstripped that of most wizards. Before the light had fully faded, he had the street lamp sorted again, reduced to an ordinary light. My work's done, and it's getting late. Molly and the children will be waiting for dinner. He packed up his spanners and said goodbye to Severus. You must bring Dudley to the burrow sometime. George and Fred are very fond of you. Charlie's eager to see how you've changed, and Molly's a devoted fan of that vampire tale. Severus inclined his head. I'll find the time. The next second, Arthur vanished with apparition. Severus watched him go, glanced at his watch, puzzled that Harry still hadn't returned, and set off for the Grangers' flat nearby. He had barely reached the door when he heard a woman sobbing inside. He rang the bell. A pale, frantic-looking man opened the door, and on seeing Severus, his face registered disappointment. Behind him, Mrs. Granger sat weeping in a chair. I'm Dudley Dursley's teacher, Severus said bluntly. Is he here? Mr. Granger, clearly Hermione's father, answered, voice trembling. They've vanished. We've searched everywhere. There's no sign of them. A bad feeling tightened at Severus's chest, and he pushed inside. Where were they last seen? In my daughter's bedroom, Mr. Granger said. To get out, they'd have to cross the living room, and my wife and I have been watching television there all afternoon. We never saw anyone come down. Without hesitating, Severus strode up the stairs to the second-floor bedroom. The open door and the decor left no doubt it belonged to a little girl. A half-finished game of draughts lay on the carpet. The window was tightly shut. Everything was tidy, no sign of struggle. Only a plush niffler lay on the rug, its back zipper gaping. Mr. and Mrs. Granger followed. Compared with his wife, Mr. Granger kept his composure, but his voice trembled. We've called the police. They're on their way. Do you know anything? Where could they be? Severus picked up the niffler. At once he recognized it as a wizarding toy. He looked up sharply. Where did this come from? For a moment, Mr. Granger seemed blank, as if some part of him had been severed. He answered almost automatically. A child's father gave it to my daughter, to thank me for treating his child. Severus's jaw tightened. Someone had tampered with Mr. Granger's memory. He drew his wand without hesitation. Under Mrs. Granger's anxious gaze, he tapped the man's forehead and cast a counter-charm. The original memory charm had been clumsily done. Dispelling it took little effort. Mr. Granger's eyes cleared, and he drew a sharp breath. In the forest, Sherwood Forest, the man led me to a tumble-down shack where a child lay burning with fever. They forced me to treat him, then gave me this doll and told me to remember it was meant for my daughter. He looked bewildered. But why did I forget everything? Why did I only remember giving it to Hermione? His gaze fell on Severus's wand. Memory restored, recognition hit him like a physical blow. You're one of them, he cried, spreading his arms to shield his wife. At that moment, a raw, familiar panic seized Severus, and he sprang forward, the words escaping him before he could stop them. Second time! This is the second time! Potter's gone missing again! 72. 3 fathers search for their son. Calm down. Keep calm. Acting on impulse now won't help. Use your heads. Think. Severus shouted, addressing both the Grangers and the restless presence of Ghost Snape inside him. Mr. Granger, a muggle, drew a long breath and did as he was told, lowering the arm he'd been using to shield his wife, though he still kept her behind him protectively. Ghost Snape, however, continued to seethe. This is different from last time. The first kidnapping was for some petty purpose, but now it's likely the werewolves who took Potter. Werewolves. They forced Mr. Granger here to treat one of the children, didn't they? Severus said in a steady voice. That shows, at least for now, they don't intend to harm the children. Whether it's Dudley or Hermione, they should still be safe, at least for the moment. Ghost Snape's roaring died away, whether moved by Severus's words or recognizing that blind fury would not help. Mr. Granger clearly took Severus seriously. He forced himself not to panic and stared at Severus with urgent concentration. "You're not with that group?" "Of course not. They're criminals, and I'm here to investigate them." Severus decided to disclose a little. Even if Hermione had not yet displayed magic, she would someday be a student at Hogwarts. Telling a wizard's parents about the magical world did not, in his view, violate the statute of secrecy. He was also acting on instructions from the Minister of Magic, who would accuse him if not. "Shall we sit and talk?" Mrs. Granger glanced at her husband, and only when he nodded did she shuffle into the kitchen to make tea. "Please sit, mister," she stammered. Granger led the way to the living room and introduced himself. "Severus Snape." "All right, Mr. Snape, what are you?" "Wizards, that's what people usually call us." Severus answered plainly. Granger's disbelief was obvious. To bridge the gap between words and proof, Severus flicked his wand. A glass on the table hopped like a rabbit, a chair floated up, and an orchid burst into bloom at the tip of his wand. These were not parlor tricks. Granger sat open-mouthed. Severus watched him and added calmly, "I could read your mind if I wanted, but spells affect muggles differently, though a direct probe could injure you." The glass reverted to normal, the chair settled, and the orchid withered and shed its petals as if nothing had happened. Granger, having seen it, believed now. His face paled as other thoughts crowded in. "The ones who took my daughter are witches or wizards too. Are you under the British government?" "We fall under the British Ministry of Magic. I'm a special commissioner assigned by them to investigate the group that took your daughter and my student." "Just you?" "For the moment, yes." "Why did they take my daughter?" "They didn't take only your daughter and my student. They also took 3 other children from wizarding families, and perhaps more. I'm still investigating their motives." Granger sat silent for a moment, then asked, "What do you want to know?" Severus was direct. "Tell me everything about your encounter with that man. If possible, take me to the place he led you." Sherwood Forest was huge and almost pathless. Even with a memory probe, Severus might not find the exact location. Better to have Granger lead them. Just then, a distant siren wailed outside, and their talk paused. Having seen Severus's abilities, Granger no longer pinned his hopes solely on the police. He sent his wife to meet the arriving officers, then narrated the day to Severus. "A bearded man knocked on my door," Granger said. "He seemed to know my wife and I were doctors. He said his son was very ill and needed help. I told him I was just a dentist, but he kept begging me to come. I took some anti-inflammatory medicine and followed him. He said he lived near Sherwood Forest and worked as a park caretaker. But after about half an hour, I realized he wasn't on any path. He was following marks on the trees. I stopped and asked what he intended. He pulled out a wooden stick, just like the one in your hand, said an incantation, and my legs wouldn't move. He led me deeper. After 2 hours, we reached a wooden shack. There was a child there with a high fever, soaked from rain, and very ill. 2 other men were there, one bearded and one tall and thin, with a sallow, weathered face. The tall, thin man was tending the feverish child and begged me to save him. I only had anti-inflammatories, so I dosed the child as best I could and told them to get proper fever medicine from a pharmacy. The 2 bearded men argued with the tall man. They even struck him. One of the bearded men made me forget certain things and remember others clearly. He put a stuffed doll into my hand and told me to give it to my daughter. Afterward, I don't know how I left the forest. I found myself in an alley near my apartment. My memories were hazy, just the fragment of being asked to see a patient. Until you made me remember it again." Severus listened, then asked, "That tall, thin man, did he have graying hair? He wasn't old, but his face was lined, worn." "Yes, exactly like that," Granger said. Severus's expression hardened. The description fit Remus Lupin. He stood and held Granger's gaze. "One last time, Mr. Granger. Will you lead me back into the forest to find the shack? It's dangerous. Ordinary people have little chance in a magical confrontation. If you won't, I can extract the memories without harming you." Granger didn't answer at once. He walked to a small study and returned with a double-barreled shotgun. "Wizards are afraid of this too, right?" he asked, his voice shaking but resolute. "They are. If I surround you with a shield charm beforehand, carrying that will make you a real threat, Severus said. Granger turned to his wife, who was leaning against the wall, covering her mouth and weeping, and soothed her. Jane, stay here. I'll bring Hermione back. Mrs. Granger hugged him and sobbed. He tightened the embrace, then slung the shotgun over his shoulder. He would do what a father must. Let's go. We can leave now, Mr. Snape. Severus nodded. They reached the foyer and were about to open the door when the bell rang. Both men froze. Severus drew his wand and placed a hand on the doorknob. They exchanged a look, weapons ready, and Severus yanked the door open. A wizard stood on the doorstep, about 50 or 60, gold-rimmed spectacles, a dark green cloak. At the sight of him, Severus felt a strange familiarity. Granger's eyes widened too. The visitor did not hesitate. Severus Snape, he asked. I am, Severus replied. Albus Dumbledore sent me to find you, the man said calmly. He told me you were in charge of finding my son. For a moment, Severus had no answer. Then the man added quietly, My son is Remus Lupin. Chapter 73. My teacher is a wizard. Granger was the first to react. From the moment Lyle finished explaining who his son was, he never lowered the muzzle of his shotgun. If anything, he raised it a fraction, the dark barrel aimed at Lyle's head as he coldly asked Severus, This man is connected to that gang of kidnappers, right? Lyle turned to stare at Granger, more precisely at the shotgun. As a wizard married to a muggle, he knew exactly what it was. Friend, according to muggle customs, it's not very polite to point such a weapon at people, is it? Granger didn't move, as if he hadn't heard. He simply waited for Severus to speak. Severus didn't trust Lyle's word at once, but he wasn't going to let a muggle hold a gun on someone either. He patted Granger's shoulder to signal him to lower the weapon for now, then asked Lyle, What evidence do you have to prove your relationship with Lupin? Lyle produced a scrap of parchment from his robe and handed it to Severus. Severus unfolded it and recognized Dumbledore's handwriting and signature. The note read, in effect, Lyle Lupin found me. He cannot stand by and watch his son fall into danger, so I have sent him to find you and participate in your operation. He is an authority on dark arts creatures and non-human supernatural phenomena and is completely trustworthy. Seeing Dumbledore's endorsement, Severus let go of his doubts. All right, no need to be nervous, Granger, he said. Just as you suspected, this man is the biological father of the man you saw in the shack that day. But that tall, thin man cared for that sick child and didn't seem cruel. That's because he's an undercover agent placed in that group by the Ministry of Magic. He lost contact some time ago. At Severus's words, Granger slowly lowered the shotgun. Lyle couldn't help asking, You've already seen Remus. How is he now? Severus shook his head. He must have done something to displease them. From what Granger saw, he appears to have lost his wand and is being mistreated inside the group. There doesn't seem to be an immediate threat to his life, and he is still trying to protect the children. Severus then introduced them properly. This is, what was your name again? Robert Granger, the man answered. Right, this is Robert Granger, a father whose daughter was also taken by those werewolves. He's a dentist and was once brought to their hideout in Nottingham. This is Lyle Lupin, an expert among wizards in non-human supernatural phenomena, and the father of Remus Lupin, the undercover agent among the werewolves. Severus then offered his own name. Severus Snape, former Hogwarts dean and professor. My student, like Robert's daughter, was likely taken by those werewolves using a portkey. Lyle came across as steady and composed, not disdainful at all toward Granger for being a muggle. He had a decisiveness and strength Remus seemed to lack. He extended his hand first. Just call me Lyle. Granger took it without hesitation. Robert. Lyle turned to Severus. I know you. I listened to the whole ministry trial on the radio. They called you the prodigal son of the magical world. Your speech was rather impressive. With that foundation of acquaintance and trust, Severus spoke up loudly. All right, gentlemen. Our objective is clear. For the safety of our son, daughter, and student, we must track down those werewolves as quickly as possible. According to Robert's discovery, their base in Nottingham is in Sherwood Forest, not far from here. This search will be extremely dangerous, but I believe we are willing to make any sacrifice for our children. We will watch each other's backs and move forward together. If there are no further questions, let's go. And so, a muggle dentist, a Hogwarts professor, and an elderly wizard set out to find their children. The wind where Harry and Hermione were held was strong. The air was damp and carried the sharp tang of the sea. In the dim light, Harry groped around, found the wall, and hauled himself up. He had just fallen backward onto a rock, nearly cracking his tailbone. "Hermione?" he called. "I'm here." Hermione's voice came from his right, tight with nervousness. She hadn't yet processed what had happened. Even as intelligent as she was, her mind was blank. Harry drew a long breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Think, Harry. What would the teacher do in this situation?" He found Hermione beside him and gripped her arm, giving her solid support. "Don't be afraid. We must have been brought here for a reason. My teacher will notice we're missing, and he'll find a way to get us back." Harry kept his own anxiety hidden. He knew he had to be the one to lead in this moment. "Calm down, Hermione. We need to figure out exactly where we are and whether anyone else is around." Holding Harry's hand, Hermione forced herself to breathe more steadily. She could tell from his voice he knew more than he was saying. "Do you know how we got here?" "I don't know about a glass ball," Harry said, "but that stuffed animal isn't a platypus. It's a magical creature called a niffler. No ordinary person could own one. The person who gave it to your father was a wizard." "A wizard?" Hermione's disbelief was obvious. "Are you a wizard too?" "I'm not," Harry said firmly, "but my teacher is, and he's a very powerful wizard, so don't worry, he will find us." His words steadied Hermione. They supported each other and felt along the cold stone walls. Hermione's cleverness began to return in small ways. "We can walk toward where the wind is coming from," she suggested. "If the wind can get in, we can get out." 74. Signs of magic. Harry and Hermione felt their way along the stone wall, inching toward the draft. Along the way, partly to keep her fear at bay and partly because she was insatiably curious, Hermione kept asking Harry about the magical world. He had no idea she would one day attend Hogwarts and become a witch herself. He soon regretted telling her anything about wizards and magic. He wasn't sure whether he'd broken the rules as badly as Sanguini had. So when Hermione pressed him, he dodged every question and kept his answers vague. Just as Harry felt he couldn't stall any longer, and Hermione's questions were growing razor-sharp, a faint orange glow slid in from the top of the stone wall ahead. "Hey! Wait, Hermione! Look!" Harry shouted, excitement cutting off her next question about whether wizardry was inborn or could be learned, a subject he scarcely understood himself. Hermione saw the light and cried out with relief, "We didn't take a wrong turn. This is the way out." By that glow, she scanned their surroundings. They were in a mountain cave. The uneven walls showed no tool marks, yet the floor bore unmistakable signs of people, something like droppings and discarded jackets. Harry studied the slab blocking the exit. It hadn't fallen there by chance. Someone had wedged it deliberately, sealing 2/3 of the opening and leaving only a gap at the top. The boulder rose 6 or 7 meters. It was hard to imagine anyone shifting it into place without machinery. Confirming there was no other exit, Harry drew a deep breath and made up his mind. "We'll have to climb over it," he said, stepping up to the rock and bracing for the ascent. Hermione's face went pale as the words sank in. "No, Harry, it's too high. If you fall," she began, but Harry was already searching for handholds. "Don't worry," he told her without looking back. "We can't rely on teachers forever. We've got hands and feet of our own." He began the climb from the base. The protrusions were brittle. Several times his foot skidded, and Hermione clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. Sweat soaked him from head to toe. Still a growing child with no training, he trembled when less than half a meter remained. His right hand clutched a knob, but could summon no strength. Swallowing hard, he glanced down. Only then did he grasp how high he'd come. His head swam, his throat burned with thirst. Retreat was impossible. Up was the only way. He forced his arm to move, lifting a lead-heavy left foot, but before he could set it on the chosen ledge, the knob his right hand gripped suddenly loosened. "Harry!" Hermione cried, her voice sharp with terror. He felt himself tipping backward, and in that instant, something extraordinary awakened inside him. The same force that had regrown his hair overnight when Aunt Petunia hacked it off, that had whisked him onto the school cafeteria roof when Dudley and his gang gave chase, and that had once shrunk an ugly pullover to puppet size when Aunt Petunia tried to force it over his head. He blinked, and when his eyes opened, he was miraculously atop the boulder. Orange light bathed his face. The world beyond the cave lay before him. An endless ocean stretched to the horizon. A tangerine sun, huge as an orange, balanced its last sliver on the sea, and the glowing sky made him think of the juice they'd drunk at noon with Sanguini and Volpe. Salty wind struck his cheeks, and he laughed, breathing it in. Ever since leaving the Dursleys, he had doubted whether he was truly a wizard. Compared with the wonders Severus had shown him, uncuttable hair, accidental escapes, and shrinking sweaters had hardly seemed magical. But now he knew he was a wizard. Severus had told him only real wizards could work such miracles. "Harry, Harry, where are you? Did you fall?" Hermione's tear-choked shout snapped him back. "I'm fine. I'm up here, Hermione. Up top," he called and turned to wave. His gaze met two pairs of eyes staring from the steps outside the cave. Harry's blood froze. "2 more arrivals?" crowed a freckled, brown-haired youth. "Must be Pierre's lot. They sent a portkey 2 days back. Didn't expect it to fetch 2. A dark-haired older man studied the petrified boy. "And a wizard not yet claimed by Hogwarts," he said. "Ha! Greyback will reward us well for this," the younger man added. At their words, every spark of joy inside Harry died. His heart, like the distant sun, sank beneath the horizon. 75. Reappearance of skeletons. Beachy Head, the tallest seaside cliff in Britain, rising from the southern coast of England. Fenrir Greyback, the werewolf, had led his followers on a wild chase across the country, dragging the Aurors behind him before finally choosing this hidden clearing beneath the cliff, ringed by jagged reefs. His mud-brown hair was slicked back, the long strands falling down his neck. His bushy beard blended into his sideburns, a style his men tried to imitate. As the most notorious werewolf in the magical world, Greyback's face was naturally savage. Powerful and lean, he was rarely seen with a wand or casting spells. Whether human or wolf, his deliberately sharpened claws and gleaming fangs were his deadliest weapons. Greyback was a pure-blood werewolf by birth. He had never been turned by a bite. From the moment he was born, he could change under the full moon into a creature that terrified everyone who saw him. Even in human form, his 17 resistance rivaled a troll's, without a troll's stupidity. For 30 years, he had been a thorn in the Ministry's side. The Aurors had never managed to capture him. Now he was clearly preparing something large. 6 or 7 tattered tents were pitched in the clearing. Raggedly dressed werewolf wizards were packing gear. In the center, a bonfire roared. Greyback sat beside it. Opposite him sat a thin, gray-haired man with a haggard air, Remus Lupin. "I've told you, Remus, you should be thanking me for my generosity," Greyback said. In daylight, people imagined Greyback raging and wild, but here he sat quietly on a low stool, speaking calmly in the firelight. Lupin had no wand, his clothes were thin and his face still bruised. When the sea breeze stirred the flames, it tossed his unkempt hair. He said nothing. According to the plan, those children would have been turned on the July full moon when every Auror was distracted by that fool professor at Hogwarts. It was our best chance. But your soft heart ruined it. Greyback's cold accusation pulled Lupin up short. Calm and seasoned, Lupin answered, "You wanted them turned, not killed. That night they were all together. If they'd changed at moonrise, they'd have torn one another apart. Not one child would have survived." "That was my concern, not yours." Greyback bared his fangs. "Yet on the eve of the full moon, you hid them underground on your own initiative." "And you punished me for it, didn't you?" Lupin said quietly. "You didn't kill me. That was reward enough." "You weakling," Greyback snapped. "You haven't the faintest idea what I'm after." "I actually admire you, Remus. You're not like the rest, smarter, steadier. Among werewolves, we need your sort. That's why I kept you alive, took your wand, and left you to babysit the brats." He rose and turned from Lupin to face the moonlit sea. "Do you think I've gathered so many just to swell our numbers? If I wanted more werewolves, group raids are the worst way. One by one is far safer." Lupin's breath quickened. After infiltrating this pack for so long, he could tell this operation was unlike anything Greyback had tried before. The man who had stayed scattered, who avoided capture by never uniting, had changed his habits entirely. Something extraordinary was afoot. Until this moment, Greyback had told no one his grand design. "What do you intend?" Lupin asked. Greyback fell silent. Two figures picked their way along the reef into the camp. With them walked two children barely in their teens. "We found them in the cave. Pierre's portkey brought them, two at once. One's a wizard with 17, but not yet enrolled at Hogwarts." The freckled youth crowed. The captured boy and girl were pale, but they did not cry, a small courage in such a place. Greyback's grin showed every fang. "Well done. You'll be rewarded. Lock them with the others. Watch them. None escape." Lupin, still grappling with Greyback's intentions, had not yet recognized the newcomers in the dark. His mind raced, trying to fathom the werewolf's plan. Then, as the freckled youth led the children past the fire, Lupin's eyes met those of the skinny, black-haired boy. For a heartbeat, he froze. He could not be mistaken. Only a handful of people knew him better than Lupin did. And this boy was the living image of that man, a carbon copy in every line. All other thoughts vanished, replaced by one frantic question. Who was this child? It could only be that man's son. Yet under Dumbledore's protection, how could he possibly be here? While Lupin stood transfixed, Greyback turned back, his savage grin in stark contrast to his earlier calm. "Questions gnawing at you, Remus? Originally, once the children were turned, we were to raise our banner. Thanks to you, the turning is delayed, but proclaiming for whom we act need wait no longer." Lupin snapped his attention back as a green glow flared behind him. "See for yourself. The fools of the magical world think him dead. Yet he never left." "Ha!" Greyback howled with laughter. Lupin spun around. High above the dark sky, directly over the white cliffs of Beachy Head, hung a gigantic green skull, a serpent's tongue writhing from its mouth. No wizard could mistake that emblem, even after all these years. It was the Dark Mark, the very symbol of the Death Eaters reborn. 76. Clues left by Lupin Severus led Granger and old Lupin out of the apartment. They ignored the darkening sky and plunged straight into Sherwood Forest. The reserve was vast and mostly deserted, except for a few outskirts sometimes used as movie locations. By the time they entered the trees, night had fully fallen. Cicadas and frogs filled the air. It was so dark, you could hardly see your hand in front of your face. Severus and old Lupin cast small lights, while Granger wore his hunting cap with a built-in lamp. With Granger guiding them, they pushed deeper into the woods. After 4 or 5 hours of walking, they came upon a charred wooden shack. The clearing around it had been tidied by hand. Signs of habitation, plastic bags, torn clothing, still lay scattered on the ground. Old Lupin's face went solemn when he saw the shack reduced to ruins. "They've moved," he said. Severus did not leap to conclusions. He approached with his wand raised and used scouring and levitation charms to clear away some of the wreckage. Someone had set the shack on fire, and most of it had burned to ash, but a few things remained. In a pile of dust, Severus found an empty potion bottle. The faded fragments of a St. Mungo's label were still visible. He uncorked it and sniffed, then nodded. "A basic healing potion from St. Mungo's," he said, "effective for common injuries." "That would be what they used to treat that child," Granger guessed. Severus moved further into the ruins and soon found more bottles, ordinary drinking bottles that hadn't burned completely. As old Lupin followed, he noticed a piece of torn felt burned down to the size of a palm. This belongs to Remus," he said, his voice catching. Both Granger and Severus turned. Old Lupin picked up the scrap, kicking dust aside and revealing a hole in the floorboards beneath. "Why would Lupin be carrying this?" Severus asked, frowning. Old Lupin held the cloth close and spoke softly. "His mother gave it to him the night of the full moon in the month of his 8th birthday, after he first transformed. He's always kept it with him, throughout Hogwarts, even afterwards." He trailed off as if recalling something painful and didn't say more. Granger listened and then, sharply, "There must be a reason something so important was left here." Severus knelt at the hole in the floor. It was at the back of the shack, not far from where the fire had started. That small scrap of felt had likely been spared because it had been damp. The boards beneath it were charred black. Severus tapped his wand against the hole, and a warped plank, twisted by heat, shot free. He caught it. 2/3 of it was charcoal. The remaining third was intact and bore clear etchings, Greyback East. Old Lupin's whole body trembled when he read the name. His face drained of color. Severus looked up. Fenrir Greyback? That notorious werewolf? You know him? Granger said nothing. He did not yet grasp the name's weight, but he saw old Lupin's distress. Old Lupin murmured, as if to himself, "Yes, I know him, and he knows me, but Remus doesn't." He clamped his mouth shut then, pain creasing his features. Severus watched for a moment, sensing a complicated history he could not untangle. He turned back to the remaining text on the plank. East, the rest was blackened by smoke, the place name incomplete. "Can you make that out?" he asked Granger. As a Muggle dentist, Granger had a better grounding in English geography, and after a moment said, "Probably Eastbourne, in East Sussex, on the southeast coast." Severus made a quick decision. "We're going there now." At the same time, the Auror office at the Ministry of Magic was in turmoil. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement had just learned that Muggles had been attacked in East Sussex. A family of 3, on a seaside holiday, had been suspended from the top of a lighthouse by magic and left to swing in the cold night wind for half the night. That alone was a vicious assault, but what made the case terrifying was what hovered in the sky above the stranded family. A bright, persistent symbol, the Dark Mark. "Someone used Morsmordre," one Auror said grimly. Robards, who had arrived with the investigative team, looked ashen. Even after Severus had been declared innocent, Robards had never looked this grim. A single dark mark did not mean the Dark Lord himself would return, but earlier that morning, the Minister for Magic had stood before the wizarding public and declared that the ministry had completely eliminated the lingering influence of the former you-know-who. And now, that very night, someone had raised his banner again, loud, ostentatious, and terrifyingly public. How would the Daily Prophet report it tomorrow? What would the public think? The Aurors had to find answers, and fast. 4 a.m. at the Old Crouch residence. After the discovery of the Dark Mark and before dawn, Crouch, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, had gathered with Scrimgeour, Robards, and Kingsley at his house. Bringing together nearly every high-ranking armed official in the ministry was clearly overkill if it were only about the Dark Mark. No one truly believed he who must not be named had returned. Even Kingsley, who had been close to Dumbledore, had never conceived that possibility. The mark was alarming, but not enough on its own to explain this level of mobilization. What really unnerved Crouch and the others was a string of failed Auror operations, especially those aimed at the pack of werewolves. Even if the Aurors hadn't tied the werewolves to the Dark Mark yet, the connection was becoming harder to dismiss. "I put my men on it," Kingsley said carefully, "but when the ministry ordered an inquiry into those werewolves, they hadn't even been notified. At the time, they were chasing Snape." Robards named 2 suspects, Philo Anderson and Horace Baker. Both are odd. Before the werewolf investigation, they were given assignments, but Philo took leave at the last minute, claiming he had to go to St. Mungo's for treatment. Horace took part in the operation, but during it he separated from his team for about 5 minutes. He says he apparated to the wrong place. Scrimgeour looked up. "Did you check St. Mungo's?" "We did," Robards said. "Philo does have a medical record, but that doesn't clear him entirely. As for Horace, our apparition monitors did pick up traces where he said he landed, yet the 5-minute gap still doesn't make sense." Crouch rubbed his temples. The pressure from these events had fallen on the Aurors, and as head of the department, he felt it keenly. He had been the likely successor to Minister Bagnold, but the scandal 7 years ago had left him mired in controversy. Rumors said that when Bagnold fully retired, he would be moved from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to International Magical Cooperation, a transfer presented as lateral, but in fact a demotion. Many men might have let their efforts slacken in such a season. Crouch, who cared fiercely for his reputation, would not. With the Snape affair, internal Auror problems, and now a Dark Mark, one more misstep could turn a forced transfer into humiliation. They smoked in the drawing room and spoke in low voices about internal leaks and failed raids when Kingsley suddenly frowned and glanced toward the top of the stairs. "Who's there?" All eyes followed. For a moment, panic flashed across Crouch's face. "Winky, is that you?" he barked. A small, cowering house elf appeared, ears flat to its head. Winky didn't mean to. Winky couldn't help it. "Back to the kitchen. Do you hear me? At once!" Crouch roared. Even Kingsley and Robards were taken aback. Scrimger looked puzzled by the sudden volume. "Sorry," Crouch muttered after shooing the elf away. He turned to the others, exhausted. "That's enough for tonight. Continue your internal investigations and control the reporting on the Dark Mark. Keep the Daily Prophet from spreading nonsense. Scrimger, you take the lead on whoever used Morsmordre." With that, the three men made no show of staying. They apparated away from the old house, leaving it silent save for the echo of their departure. Crouch sank into a chair as if he had no strength left. Winky crept back out from the kitchen and began to bang its head against the wall, chanting, "It's all Winky's fault. Winky to blame." "Stop it, Winky," Crouch snapped, stopping the self-harm. The elf collapsed at his feet and sobbed. In that moment, the head of department carried none of his official bearing. He looked hollowed out, a man who had been wrung dry. When Winky's sobs quieted a little, Crouch stared toward the empty corner by the fireplace and spoke coldly, as if addressing someone unseen. "I hope you've been staying at home like I told you. I hope what's happening outside hasn't anything to do with you." The room answered with its own silence. By dawn, the Aurors had managed to keep a lid on the story. The Daily Prophet's account of the previous night's Dark Mark was heavily constrained. Few witches and wizards even knew the details. Many had only heard a general rumor that something dreadful had taken place. The prophet ran a brief piece saying dark wizards had appeared in East Sussex and had conjured a forbidden curse, and that Aurors were assembling an investigation team. Other papers received the same ministry warnings and buried the story. The one exception was the Quibbler, which splashed it across the front page. Lovegood, as usual, didn't have the facts and used the incident mostly as fodder to mock the Aurors. Still, there were witnesses near East Sussex who had seen the display with their own eyes. They had no way to spread the news widely and could only wait anxiously for word from the ministry. At dawn, 3 men arrived in Eastbourne, East Sussex. They had taken a special bus and picked up the same low, unsettled rumors on board about what had happened the night before. After leaving Sherwood Forest, Severus and the others did not apparate away. Neither Severus nor Mr. Lupin had ever been to Eastbourne, and there was no suitable flu network in Nottingham, so, taking Granger with them, they decided to travel by public transport. Severus raised his wand by the roadside. With a deafening bang, a 3-deck, violently purple bus materialized in front of them. Granger gaped at the gold letters across the windshield. The night bus. He had already seen some strange magic from Severus and Mr. Lupin on the way, but the sudden appearance of this bus still left him astonished. "What mindset do you use when you're filling a patient's tooth?" Severus asked Granger quietly. Granger swallowed. "Just a very normal mindset. Mostly it's a bit dull and boring." "Then treat this like a house call to fill a tooth," Severus said. "Keep calm, treat everything you encounter as ordinary, and don't let anyone on the bus discover you aren't a wizard." Granger nodded. Mr. Lupin boarded first and was greeted at the door by a middle-aged woman conductor. "Welcome to the night bus, emergency transport for stranded witches and wizards. I'm Nara Polk, and I'll be your conductor this evening," she said warmly. "Where are you headed, gentlemen?" "Eastbourne," Mr. Lupin said. "Nottingham to Eastbourne, quite a distance. Single fare is 1 galleon and 7 sickles." Polk eyed the 3 of them. "3 of you, then. That'll be 4 galleons and 11 sickles total." Mr. Lupin fumbled in his pocket, produced some coins, and handed over exactly 4 galleons and 11 sickles. "Is there a bed left on the 2nd floor? We'd like somewhere to rest." "Of course, gentlemen." Polk beamed. Mr. Lupin led Granger, who was doing his best not to stare, up the stairs to the bus's 2nd floor. Severus lingered on the pavement, then produced a gold galleon and thrust it at Polk. "Also prepare a cup of hot chocolate and a toothbrush and towel for each of us." Severus had noticed Mr. Lupin's slender purse. In his youth, Lupin had briefly enjoyed the sort of respect a ministry position brought, but after he was revealed to be a werewolf, the family had been uprooted, moving from place to place. His mother had died years ago. Lupin had been fending for himself and struggling to hold steady employment. Polk took the coin, and when she finally registered his face, she froze, then lit up with delight. Ern, look who it is," she called, attracting the driver's attention. When he saw Severus, he blurted, Good heavens, Severus Snape! Severus made a quick shushing gesture. There were passengers resting on the first floor. Fortunately, both conductor and driver had enough sense to lower their voices. Polk, however, insisted on returning the galleon, pressing it back into his hand. I'm a loyal fan of Bloodlove, the Vampire, and the Muggle. I listened to that whole Wizengamot trial. Your speech was marvelous. Tonight's hot chocolate, the toothbrushes and towels, are on me. For a moment, Severus experienced the unexpected perks of notoriety. People who once looked at him with contempt were different now. He mentally cleared his throat twice, as if to put on a show for Ghost Snape, and accepted the favor with a quiet, "Thank you for your kindness, ma'am." "Have a pleasant journey," Polk called. Severus climbed to the second floor. It held only Mr. Lupin and Granger. Mr. Lupin was cleaning his spectacles with his wand. With no one else around, Granger finally allowed his curiosity to show. He was studying a moving poster of the Weird Sisters pasted beside the window. "We should reach Eastbourne by about 7 in the morning," Mr. Lupin estimated when Severus appeared. "But the information on that notice board was thin. Even when we get there, it'll take time to look for clues." Severus lay down on the soft bunk and asked, "Does he rarely come home?" "In all these years, except for his mother's funeral, he's hardly ever come back," Mr. Lupin replied calmly. "He writes me every week about what he's seen in his travels. He's been like this since childhood, sensitive about being a werewolf. He thinks it's because of him that his mother and I had to lead such a displaced life, and he bears it all silently. But none of that is his fault." Granger had lost interest in the poster and tried to comfort Mr. Lupin. "Children are like that. Hermione always thought she had little secrets, but Jean and I knew she was really self-conscious about her front teeth. We pretended not to notice and never touched her forbidden zone." Mr. Lupin shook his head, voice low. "He's afraid to come back because he doesn't want to disrupt my life. But as a father, I've been running away too. I feel very guilty toward Remus." For a time, the small cabin fell quiet. Lying to one side, Severus could guess at the source of Mr. Lupin's guilt. Before the bus started moving again, he made a light joke to Granger. "Robert, don't forget to say good night to Myron Wagtail in the poster before you go to sleep. He'll serenade you to sleep." Granger's eyes brightened. "Can I pick the song?" "Of course, radio host Severus Snape will be at your service," Mr. Lupin managed, sharing a rare wry quip. The three men laughed softly together and enjoyed a brief, peaceful moment. 79. Hidden Death Eaters. After the night bus finally set off, Granger truly saw the wonders of magical engineering. He stared out the window at the passing buildings. Mailboxes, street lamps, even houses no longer stood stubbornly in the way of the bus. When the bus headed straight for them, they slid aside on their own to clear a path. Once it had passed, they jumped back into place and resumed their usual positions. The sight felt unreal to Granger. Yesterday, he had been on holiday with his wife and daughter, and today he was traveling through the wizarding world with two wizards. Severus noticed the stunned look on Granger's face. He had finished his hot chocolate and, still tired, lay down on the soft bed. The scenery blurred. The night bus supposedly traveled 100 miles with every leap. Severus had no desire to verify that claim. He closed his eyes and slept. When he woke and drew back the curtains, it was daylight. Polk, the conductor, was waking them one by one. "Gentlemen, we've reached Eastbourne, but there were some incidents here last night." Severus sat up, took the damp towel Polk handed him, and wiped his face. "What happened?" "The Daily Prophet says a group of dark wizards gathered here last night, murdered 3 muggles, and cast a forbidden curse. But Mr. Dawes, who just boarded, says someone used Morsmordry on the cliff last night." Polk's voice trembled. Severus paused, lowering the towel slowly. Lupin, who had just gotten out of bed, froze too. His face had gone pale. Even Snape's ghost held his breath. Only Granger looked bewildered. "Do you feel your arm burning?" the ghost asked before he could stop himself. Severus answered clearly, "No, I'm certain Lord Voldemort could not have returned so soon, and that Morsmordre could not have been cast by him to summon his followers." "Don't say that name," the ghost snapped. Severus shrugged. "Then what should I call him? The Dark Lord? I'm not going to flatter him." Without wasting time, Severus dressed and stood. "Introduce me to Mr. Dawes," he said. Polk obliged, and soon they met Mr. Dawes on the bus's first floor. He was a short, thin wizard in spectacles, still visibly shaken. "Where did you see the dark mark?" Severus asked bluntly. "On that cliff by the coast. The prophet's wrong to call it a minor incident. That was the dark mark, the sign of that lot." Mr. Dawes trembled. "If you're here on holiday, I advise you to leave at once. They do all sorts of evil, and they've gathered again. Who knows what they're planning?" Severus thanked him, then stepped off the bus with Lupin and Granger. "It definitely has something to do with those werewolves," Severus said with certainty. 10 years ago, they were you-know-who's mercenaries, though the Death Eaters always looked down on them. Greyback was called a scavenger. They wouldn't suddenly and inexplicably show the dark mark at a time like this. Lupin frowned. Could a Death Eater have contacted them? Which Death Eater who escaped Azkaban during those trials would risk acting now? Severus shook his head. Most of Lucius Malfoy's sort are opportunists. They won't move without guaranteed gain, and until the mastermind openly returns, they won't switch sides. The hardliners are in Azkaban, feeding the Dementors. Then Severus froze, struck by something from the original case that flared in his memory. Lupin and Granger noticed his pause and looked at him. "What is it?" Lupin asked. "Before we came, Minister Bagnold told me the werewolves seem to have a mole in the Auror office," Severus said. "Their operations are known in advance. I just remembered, a high-ranking ministry official has an old acquaintance tucked away at his home, a Death Eater who was supposed to have died in Azkaban." Lupin felt a chill at that. A high-ranking ministry official protecting a Death Eater. If true, it explained how they'd been warned so often. "We can't handle that alone," Severus said. "Before we go to the cliff Mr. Dawes mentioned, we need to send an owl. Kingsley will want to see the letter I write." Later, at the werewolf encampment. After the dark mark lit the previous night, Greyback had moved some of his men to the Seacliff Cave that doubled as a portkey landing point. The place was well hidden and warded. An ordinary wizard approaching would notice nothing amiss. Among those brought there were the captured children and Lupin, who had been left to act as their caretaker. Surrounded by others, Lupin kept his suspicions about Harry's identity to himself. It wasn't until the next morning, when he was delivering breakfast, that he finally had a brief moment alone with Harry and the others. Except for a boy named Jimmy, who still ran a slight fever, the children were listless. Frayed nerves and restless nights made them quiet and withdrawn. Harry and Hermione, newly arrived, were relatively bright by comparison. They ate with decent appetites. Lupin went through the motions of breakfast with them, pretending calm. He chatted with Jimmy and the kids who already knew him, keeping his voice light. "There'll be beef for lunch." "Is it roasted?" a boy asked, a rare note of hope in his voice. "Probably. There's not much else we can do out here." Lupin added casually, "Harry, could you pass me the apple jam?" Harry, who had been thinking about finding a chance to escape or at least leave a message for Severus, reached instinctively for the jar next to him. Then, instinctively, every hair on his arms rose. He looked up, and his eyes met the man who had spoken, Lupin, quietly holding his gaze. "Mr. Peter, I think I must have misheard you. Were you calling me?" Harry swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he asked. Lupin smiled and didn't press him further, only saying softly, "Perhaps you didn't mishear. I was indeed calling you just now. Isn't your name Dudley?" Harry kept his guard up. He was certain he hadn't misheard. The man in front of him had clearly said, Harry. Logically, almost no one should know his real name except Dumbledore and Severus. Under the circumstances, he couldn't accuse the man, whom the other werewolves seemed to call Remus Peter, of having just used his true name, so he forced himself to continue eating and watched the man closely. After taking the apple jam, the werewolf behaved as if he'd really been calling for Dudley. He returned to his ordinary manner and chatted with the children who trusted him about what they might have for lunch. Outwardly, there was nothing amiss. That made Harry doubt himself again. Had he really misheard? But Lupin's calm exterior hid turmoil. The moment he'd risked calling Harry, and the boy posing as Dudley had agreed without hesitation and handed over the jam, Lupin had known. This had to be James and Lily's son. The discovery almost unhinged him. Why was Harry Potter here? How had Dumbledore allowed him to fall into a werewolf den? Lupin's breathing quickened. He hardly dared look at the children in case they saw the panic in his eyes. If Harry had watched closely, he might have noticed the hurried breath and the thin panic behind Lupin's smile, things that couldn't be faked. Breakfast passed, but the werewolves kept the children inside the cave. At best, Lupin was allowed a minute or two at a time to tell the youngsters a story, like Babbity Rabbity and her cackling stump. Other werewolves hovered nearby. Even when he had a moment alone with the children, it didn't last. That changed only around noon, when something outside the cave stirred Greyback and several others to leave in a hurry. Security lapsed. Lupin seized the chance. He suddenly clapped a hand over Harry's mouth and dragged him behind a large rock deeper in the cave. Harry's heart froze. He had already suspected Lupin had recognized him. Despair filled him until Lupin leaned close to his ear and whispered in a rushed voice, "Harry Potter, son of James and Lily, I know it's you." At the names of his parents, Harry's pupils contracted. He stared at Lupin in shock. The previous day, he'd been in Nottingham with Severus, tracking a pack of werewolves with his teacher. He had had no idea there was an undercover ministry man among them. Who are you?" he demanded when Lupin removed his hand. "I was your father's best friend," Lupin said earnestly, meeting Harry's eyes. "He and I were classmates at Hogwarts. We were nearly inseparable." Harry didn't believe him right away. He took a step back, eyes fixed on Lupin. "You're lying. You're clearly a werewolf." Lupin was silent for a few seconds, then a bitter smile touched his face. "Yes, I'm a werewolf, the only one who ever attended Hogwarts. Your father and the others became my friends because they didn't care about what I was. They did everything they could to be with me during the full moon." He held Harry's gaze without flinching. There was sincerity in his eyes, but without proof, Harry couldn't accept it. Lupin saw his doubt and changed tack. "You can question what I was to your father," he said quietly, "but look at what I've done here. Those children trust me because I saved them a week ago. The other werewolves mistreat me and took my wand because I protected these children from harm. That alone should show I'm not like the others." There was a pleading note to his voice. Lupin hated that he was a werewolf as much as anyone hated him for it. Harry, who had spent the morning with Hermione and the other captured children, had already heard them say Lupin had acted differently. He knew, at least in their hearts, Lupin was not like the rest. "I can believe you?" Harry said. Relief broke over Lupin's face. He patted Harry's shoulder. "You look almost exactly like your father when he was young. But your scar, your eyes, you took your mother's green." That confirmed something else. Lupin had seen Harry when he was very small. Harry explained quickly. "My teacher helped disguise me when he took me from Aunt Petunia's. He told me my true identity couldn't be known, so to the world I've been calling myself Dudley Dursley." Lupin's attention sharpened at the word teacher. Who took you from your aunt?" Harry hesitated, then realized that if Lupin already knew who he was, the man would learn the teacher's identity from a newspaper soon enough. He decided not to hide it. "My teacher is Severus Snape." The cave fell very still. Lupin's face went ashen with shock. He gripped Harry's shoulders hard. "Who did you say your teacher is?" "The potions master at Hogwarts, head of Slytherin, Severus Snape."